Hey guys, tonight we drift into the forgotten Venice that existed long before postcards, cruise ships, or crowds ever learned its name. You open your eyes inside a lagoon that feels half real and half dream, a place where the water moves slowly, as if trying not to wake the houses perched above it. A faint, pearly mist clings to the canals like a blanket someone forgot to fold, softening edges, muting colors, and making every distant sound feel like it's arriving from another century. In this older Venice, the mornings don't rush. They stretch. They breathe. They yawn their way awake. A solitary gondolier, barefoot and still sleepy, pushes his boat along an empty canal. The oar slides into the water with a calm, rhythmic hush, like someone turning the pages of an ancient book. A fish splashes near a mossy wooden piling. A church bell rings distantly, not trying to impress anyone, just marking time in a city that once believed it had all the time in the world. Here, you can almost feel the weight of history thickening the air. Not a heavy weight, more like a warm shawl across your shoulders. Before we go deeper into its alleys, its shipyards, its secrets, and its scandals, I'd love to ask something simple of you. If you find these sleepy tales comforting, you can like and subscribe, but only if it feels right. And if you're awake enough, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I genuinely love reading those. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a slow breath. The lagoon drifts back toward you, welcoming you deeper in. The Venice you find here is quieter than you ever imagined. Not silent. No living city is ever silent, but calm in a way that modern Venice no longer remembers. In these early centuries, there are no rolling luggage wheels on stone, no selfie sticks poking the sky, no restaurant barkers calling out for pizza eaters, no ferry engines humming like irritated bees. Only wooden boats, oars, sandaled footsteps, and conversations carried softly across the water. Even the architecture seems to whisper. Soft arches, weathered bricks, windows framed in wood and iron, not neon signs and ticket counters. There's something almost miraculous about this place, and that's not just poetic exaggeration. One well-known historical fact is that Venice was literally built on millions of wooden piles driven into the mud of the lagoon, many of them still supporting the city centuries later. Those ancient timbers, protected from oxygen, hardened beneath the water until they became almost stone-like, an accidental engineering marvel. But older residents liked to whisper a different, stranger story, a curiosity that Venetian foundations were blessed by spirits who lived in the tidal mud. Fishermen claimed to hear voices under their boats during low tide, faint, bubbling murmurs from below. Most Venetians dismissed this as superstition, but in a city where land floats and fog seems alive, people were willing to believe a little magic was hiding underfoot. As you continue gliding, you notice something else. The early morning light doesn't simply fall onto Venice. It slides across it, like a second lagoon made of gold and rose. Doors open to let in fresh air. Linen shirts flutter on clotheslines between houses. A cat emerges from a corner, stretches, and surveys you like a tiny, furry magistrate. This version of Venice feels untouched because it was. No tour groups, no cameras, no skip-the-line tickets. Just life, real, raw, ordinary life. The gondolier ahead of you pauses to adjust his rope. He doesn't know he's moving through what will one day be one of the most photographed landscapes on Earth. He just knows the tide is rising, and if he waits too long, he'll have to duck under the low bridge near the fish market. You drift behind him, listening. His humming carries across the canal, slow, rhythmic, like someone humming to keep themselves awake. Historians still argue whether Venice grew slowly, house by house, or whether it expanded in frantic bursts after waves of migration during political crises on the mainland. But standing here, well, floating here, you sense both stories could be true. Parts of the city feel spontaneous, as if placed by whim. Others feel methodical, laid out by minds who knew exactly what they wanted. You turn a corner, and the fog thickens just a bit. It curls around your shoulders. It softens your breath. It blurs the bricks until they look like brushstrokes. Something in the air shifts. Not unpleasant, just mysterious. A feeling like the city is keeping a secret from you, inviting you to chase it but promising nothing. And maybe that's the magic of pre-tourist Venice. It doesn't perform. It just exists. Yet the deeper you drift, the more you feel an underlying tension, an echo of the dangers, rivalries, and dramas that built this watery empire. Venice may look peaceful at dawn, but this peace was earned, guarded, and occasionally stained with consequences you'll discover soon enough. For now, though, let's stay in the gentle beginning. Let the water rock you. Let the oar's slow strokes soothe you. Let the fog wrap itself around your thoughts. But stay close, because the further we go, the more this quiet city will reveal. And the strangest chapter of its birth is just ahead. You glide deeper into the waking city, the canal narrowing until the stone walls seem close enough for you to trace their damp surfaces with your fingertips. The gondolier ahead doesn't speak. He merely shifts his weight, guiding his long black hull through a passage no wider than the boat itself. The oar creaks softly, as if it has its own opinion about how early it is. Here, the houses lean toward one another like old friends sharing gossip. Their wooden beams sag. Their bricks sweat out the night's humidity. Water laps at their foundations in a slow, patient rhythm. Everything feels suspended between sea and sky, as if the city hasn't decided which one it belongs to. Venice was always a negotiation with nature. Not a battle, a negotiation. The ground beneath you isn't ground at all. It's an illusion the Venetians perfected over centuries, a trick performed with timber, mud, and stubbornness. A well-known fact. The city rests on millions of wooden piles, driven so deep into the lagoon's muddy bed that they created an artificial firmness where there should have been only shifting sediment. Oak, alder, larch, trees sacrificed to build a place where trees do not grow. Yet even with those pillars, the idea of constructing homes, churches, and palaces atop a marshland was so bizarre that medieval chroniclers often describe Venice as a miracle. They didn't know enough about engineering to explain it, so they reached for divine intervention. It was easier to imagine the hand of God guiding each wooden stake than to picture sweaty laborers hammering them in, waist-deep in brackish mud. You continue drifting as the canal widens, opening into a calmer stretch where reflections settle into near-perfect mirrors. Here the illusion becomes stronger. For a moment, you aren't sure whether the buildings rise upward or downward, whether their foundations are above you or below you. The line between reality and reflection has blurred. A small bridge arches overhead. Low, simple, no ornamentation. Just enough stone to step across. The gondolier ducks under it without breaking his rhythm. Beneath that bridge's arch, you catch a glimpse of something unusual. A bundle of waterlogged ropes, half buried in silt. At first they look ordinary, but then you notice wooden pegs running through them in rhythmic intervals. They might be remnants of an early embankment, or they might be leftover fragments from a collapsed dock. Historians still debate whether Venetians built the earliest walkways as temporary planks laid across stilts or as permanent bridges rising from the mud. Both theories make sense. Both contradict each other. Venice thrives on contradictions. There's a curiosity locals used to whisper about, that the city was founded by fugitives escaping mainland invasions, but that those refugees were so desperate they built paths across exposed mudflats using woven mats of reeds. Some believe those reed paths kept sinking until they formed layers, one on top of another, creating the strange floating streets that early visitors wrote about in confused letters home. It's impossible to prove, yet the idea lingers like lagoon mist, fragile, unlikely, and strangely believable. The gondolier turns left, where the canal grows shallow enough that the mud glimmers beneath the surface like a dark mirror. You can smell the salt, the silt, the faint sweetness of seaweed caught between stones. Venice never pretended to hide its scent. It carries the perfume of tides and decay in equal measure. You reach a point where wooden poles rise from the water like a small, silent forest. Some lean, some twist, some look straight and proud. They form a strange horizon, an architecture beneath the architecture. These piles aren't decorative. They're reminders of everything holding the city up. Without them, the lagoon would swallow Venice in a heartbeat. The gondolier slows. Not a stop, just a softer pace. He lets the boat glide on its own momentum. The water becomes eerily quiet. You watch the buildings ahead shift with each ripple. They seem to breathe. They seem alive. And maybe, in their own way, they are. Venice reacts to every tide, every wind, every passing boat. It rises slightly when no one is moving. It settles when crowds gather. A living organism disguised as stone. You drift under another narrow bridge. Someone above crosses carrying a wicker basket. Their footsteps are soft, almost secretive. Venice teaches its people to walk lightly. Below the bridge, the canal deepens again, and suddenly you sense something changing. Not in the architecture, but in the mood. There's a subtle pressure in the air, a growing awareness that paths built on water are both beautiful and precarious. The early Venetians understood this truth intimately. They lived with tides licking their doorsteps, storms pushing waves into their living rooms, and foundations that needed constant tending. Yet they stayed. They built. They expanded. They believed in their improbable city. As you drift farther, the gondolier hums a melody you faintly recognize, a tune that sounds half lullaby, half work song. It echoes against the damp walls and reflects back toward you with a softened, dreamlike quality. Every stone you pass, every timber, every arch has a story behind it, layered beneath centuries of adaptation and survival. This fragile platform on the sea became a republic that would one day command fleets, negotiate with emperors, and shape continents. But first, it needed to stay afloat. You feel the water shift beneath the gondola, a subtle rolling that makes the reflections shimmer like melted metal. Something in the distance creaks. A wooden dock groans. A gull cries overhead. You're drifting toward a place where Venice's foundations were tested, strengthened, rebuilt, and tested again. And soon, you'll find out what guarded Venice more fiercely than any wall ever could. But not just yet. Let the city move under you. Let the water hold you. Let the next secret come slowly. The canal widens again until the city seems to fall away on both sides, replaced by open water that glimmers like polished metal under the early light. The gondolier guides you toward the edge of the lagoon, where Venice dissolves into a dreamscape of reeds, mudflats, and shimmering tidal pools. The line between land and sea vanishes here. It's as if the world forgot to finish drawing the map. The air is cooler, fresher. It tastes of salt and distant storms. This is where Venice hid its greatest advantage. Not in marble palaces or massive walls, but in a natural labyrinth that outsiders never fully understood. A place where the water is shallow enough to betray invaders, deep enough to cradle a fleet, and shifting enough to confuse anyone who didn't grow up watching the tides like a clock. The gondolier pulls the boat forward, avoiding a submerged sandbank you didn't even see. His movements are instinctive, like someone stepping through a dark room they've memorized since childhood. You drift into the marshlands. Birds circle overhead. Ripples widen, then fade. The lagoon feels infinite. Venice owed its survival to this watery maze. A well-known fact is that the lagoon protected the city from countless invasions, most famously the Lombards, whose heavy cavalry simply couldn't reach the island settlements through the mud and tangled channels. Armies that could crush cities in a week were rendered utterly useless by knee-deep water and shifting sand. But the lagoon didn't just defend Venice because it was wet. It defended Venice because it was clever. The mudbanks moved. The tides changed. Deep spots became shallow within a season. Only locals knew the safe passages. Only locals knew which channels you could cross during the morning tide, but not in the evening. Only locals knew where a hidden sandbar could flip a boat or trap a galley. There's a curiosity old fishermen used to pass down. The belief that the lagoon had moods. They said its channels wandered like children, unpredictably drifting from year to year. Some swore the lagoon hid secrets deliberately, covering dangerous banks with deceptive smooth water. Others claimed it revealed paths only to those who respected it, an old superstition that feels strangely comforting as you drift deeper into its embrace. Ahead, wooden stakes rise from the shallows, silent markers placed centuries ago to guide local sailors. They lean at odd angles, worn smooth by tides and wind. No one else knew what they meant, but Venetians could read them like a book. One meant safe passage. Another meant turn here. Another meant avoid this channel unless you want to meet the bottom. The gondolier steers between them without hesitation. As the water narrows again, you glimpse something unusual beneath the surface. Lines, almost like paths, where the seagrass is thinner. Maybe remnants of ancient fishing routes. Maybe evidence of dredging. Or maybe, just maybe, the lagoon is revealing one of its hidden roads to you. No army could march through here. No cavalry could maneuver. No siege engine could float across this chaos. That was Venice's genius. Its defenses weren't built. They were grown. But this natural fortress wasn't permanent. Historians still argue whether early Venetians deliberately dredged certain channels to create naval shortcuts, or whether they simply adapted to whatever paths nature offered. Some believe the Republic shaped the lagoon as much as the lagoon shaped the Republic. Others insist the lagoon remained wild and unpredictable right up until the Renaissance. You watch a heron glide low across the water and land on a reed bed. The gondola glides a little slower now, the bottom occasionally brushing hidden mud banks. The sound is soft, like a whispered warning. A group of fishermen in a small boat passes in the distance. Their nets hang heavy, dripping silver droplets. They don't wave, they simply nod once, acknowledging the gondolier, acknowledging you, acknowledging the ancient rhythm of life on water. You realize something? The lagoon isn't empty. It's alive, teeming, protective. It was here that Venetians learned to read the world differently. They didn't measure distance the way mainlanders did. They didn't travel by roads. They didn't navigate by landmarks. They listened to tides, to currents, to the wind's direction at dawn. And so do you now. A low hum comes from somewhere behind you. Not threatening, just the sigh of water shifting with the changing tide. The marsh grasses sway in unison, bowing toward the open sea. A breath later, the tide pushes back inland, insisting on its own direction. This push and pull was the heartbeat of early Venice. The gondolier finally speaks, voice low and roughened by salt air, though you can't tell if he's addressing you or the lagoon itself. Acqua buona stamattina. Good water this morning. He says nothing else. He doesn't need to. You drift past a sandbar where small crabs scuttle between puddles. Nearby, the remnants of an old wooden watchtower lean precariously toward the water, half swallowed by reeds. Perhaps it once belonged to lagoon guards, men known as the Gastaldi, who patrolled these waters in small boats. Their job wasn't to fight enemies. Their job was to make sure the lagoon itself stayed alive. A wooden plank juts from the mud like a broken rib, covered in barnacles. Behind it, a faint path of disturbed seagrass leads deeper into the marsh, too straight to be natural, too subtle to be obvious. A hint that someone used this secret route long before you drifted here. You watch it fade behind you as the gondolier steers toward deeper water. The horizon shifts. The mist thickens. Something is waiting ahead. Not danger, just revelation. You're approaching the place where Venice learned to become more than a city. A moment where wood, water, and willpower collided into something unstoppable. But we'll get there slowly, quietly, like the tide creeping in. Because the lagoon still has one last secret to share with you. And it's the secret that made Venice an empire. The marsh is thin behind you until the water deepens and steadies, turning the gondola into a soft arrow sliding across glass. The city begins to reappear on the horizon, at first just shapes, then silhouettes, then the familiar leaning walls and narrow alleys rising from the lagoon like half-forgotten memories. Venice feels closer now, but also older, as if you've drifted through centuries rather than canals. You glide toward a cluster of houses that seem to have grown out of the water in defiance of common sense. Their bricks are mismatched, patched over, repaired again, then patched once more. Some windows are small squares. Others are elegant curves. A wooden balcony juts over the canal, like someone's experimental idea that somehow survived generations of storms. This is not the Venice of grandeur yet. This is the Venice of beginnings. Before it was a stage for artists, diplomats, and palaces, it was a collection of families trying to survive on islands barely big enough to host a vegetable garden. They didn't come here seeking beauty. They came seeking escape from invasions, from famine, from chaos on the mainland. Venice began as a refuge. Then it became a settlement. Then it became an experiment. Only later did it become a republic. You drift into a small campo, a square afloat on wooden piles. A woman rinses fabric in a bucket, humming a tune whose words you can't quite catch. A fisherman ties his boat to a metal ring embedded in stone, adjusting the knot with hands that look like they've wrestled ropes since childhood. A child chases a chicken between laundry lines. Everywhere you turn, life happens close to the water. Always the water, never away from it. One well-known fact is that early Venetian power came from something deceptively simple: salt. Not glamorous, not exotic, but essential. The lagoon produced it cheaply and abundantly, and the families who controlled its trade quickly transformed from refugees into merchants. Salt paid for ships, which paid for protection, which paid for influence. But alongside the facts, Venice nurtured stranger stories. A curiosity lived quietly in these early communities, the belief that the lagoon itself rewarded those who worked with it rather than against it. Fishermen claimed that certain families always caught more fish, no matter the season. Boat builders whispered that certain islands had good wood luck, making their vessels faster and more resilient. These ideas weren't written down, yet they shaped attitudes for generations. Your gondola drifts near a warehouse where two men argue about something on a parchment map. One of them jabs a finger at a line drawn across the lagoon. The other shakes his head violently. You can't hear the words, but their gestures are unmistakable. Access to trade routes, fishing rights, maybe even accusations of cheating tides. Early Venice was full of these tensions. Not dramatic feuds, more like cautious negotiations. The families who settled these islands, clans like the Candianos, Orciolos, Dandalos, slowly developed a political structure that balanced ambition with fear. Fear of neighbors, fear of the mainland, fear of losing what little stability they had found. And fear, as it often does, created order. You pass under a low bridge and enter a quieter canal lined with stone warehouses. Their doors open directly onto the water, allowing boats to glide straight inside like visiting guests. Here, early Venetian trade blossomed. Salt, fish, hides, timber, wool, all the dull, practical goods that quietly build empires when handled by determined hands. But something else shaped Venice in these early centuries: the absence of a king. The mainland was full of lords, counts, dukes, and ambitious men with swords and banners. Venice chose a different path. It experimented with councils, assemblies, magistrates, and elected leaders long before the rest of Europe caught on. And this is where the great academic debate comes in. Historians still argue whether Venice's unique political system emerged naturally from its early communal spirit, or whether mainland elites imported more centralized structures as they fled to the lagoon. Some argue Venice was born democratic. Others say it was always aristocratic. Most agree it was a little of both. A paradox wrapped in marsh water. You drift past an elderly man sitting on a stone step, mending a fishing net. His hands work automatically, but his eyes follow you with quiet interest. Behind him, drying nets drape across wooden poles like ghostly curtains. The gondolier steers right into a canal, so narrow the buildings feel like cliffs. Music echoes faintly from a distant workshop, something played on a lute or early fiddle. Each note bounces between the walls and softens, turning into a lullaby. You begin to understand what made Venice different. It was created by people who refused to give up, who refused to bow to mainland rulers, who refused to let the sea define where life could or could not exist. The lagoon forced them to innovate, to cooperate, to observe the world with unusual precision, and eventually to organize themselves into a force capable of shaping the Mediterranean. But that transformation didn't happen in a council chamber. It happened here, in the tiny campos, the alleys, the workshops, the arguments over fishing rights, the slow accumulation of wealth and trust. Something shifts in the breeze. A gull cries overhead. The gondola glides from shadow into sunlight. Ahead of you lies the place where this young community transformed into a naval power with a heartbeat louder than any bell tower. But that heartbeat needs its own moment, its own introduction, its own rising tension. You're being pulled toward it, not by the gondolier, but by the rhythm of the city itself. The gondola turns into a wider, straighter canal, and suddenly the air feels different, charged, purposeful, humming with an energy that doesn't belong to quiet neighborhoods or sleepy campos. The buildings grow taller here. Their windows widen. Their doors open onto the water like mouths waiting to swallow entire boats. You're approaching the place where Venice learned to flex its power. Not with walls, not with armies, but with wood, iron, discipline, and astonishing speed. The gondolier doesn't need to say a word. The faint echo you hear, distant, rhythmic, metallic, is unmistakable. It rolls across the water like slow thunder. The Arsenale. Even in this early age, long before tourists ever imagined Venice, the Arsenale was the city's heartbeat, a colossal shipyard where galleys weren't just built, but created with a precision that felt centuries ahead of its time. And tonight, you're drifting right toward it. The canal widens again, opening into a massive basin framed by high brick walls. Towers rise from the complex like watchful sentinels. Wooden cranes, ropes as thick as your arm, and scaffolding made of larch and pine dominate the skyline. Workers move across walkways and docks with steady, practiced rhythm. No one shouts. They don't need to. Everyone here knows exactly what to do. A well-known fact. The Venetian Arsenale was the largest industrial complex in Europe before the Industrial Revolution, capable of producing a fully equipped war galley in a single day. Not because of magic, but because of organization. Assembly line organization. Standardized parts. Specialized teams. Centuries before factories. Centuries before blueprints. Centuries before the rest of Europe caught up. You drift along the perimeter wall, where windows glow with the orange light of furnaces. Inside, you glimpse silhouettes of men hammering iron nails, shaping oarlocks, forging anchors. Sparks fly against the gloom. Their movements are fast but graceful, each strike part of a larger rhythm, like percussion in a vast maritime symphony. The gondolier slows, letting you absorb the sight. The smell of pine resin mixes with smoke and salty air. The water reflects firelight like molten bronze. Then you hear the sound that defines the Arsenale. Wood being shaped, chisels biting, saws whispering, steam rising from freshly bent planks. In a nearby shed, shipwrights use ancient techniques to bend massive oak ribs over fire, shaping the skeletons of galleys that will one day dominate the Mediterranean. You watch one man sprinkle water over hot wood, releasing a burst of aromatic steam. Another hammers a heated iron clamp into place. Their movements are steady, synchronized, almost hypnotic. There's a curiosity people rarely talk about. The Arsenale once had its own workforce navy, a group of boatmen who patrolled the lagoon solely to deliver supplies to shipbuilders with impossible speed. They raced between islands, carrying timber, rope, pitch, food, and messages so fast that some foreign envoys thought Venice had supernatural couriers. You drift past an open dock where a newly built hull rests on wooden supports. Workers swarm around it, carrying ropes, buckets of pitch, and bundles of oars. Someone tests the curvature of the hull with a long plank. Someone else measures the distance between oarlocks. A young apprentice sweeps wood shavings into the water, where they float away like tiny curled feathers. The Arsenale wasn't just a workplace. It was a machine, a living organism powered by thousands of hands, each performing a task so specialized that no single person fully understood the entire process. But together, they produced miracles. You drift closer to the main gate, two imposing towers flanking a decorated entrance. Lions carved in stone stare down with cold pride. These lions once terrified ambassadors. Passing through this gate meant entering the beating heart of Venice's power, and no outsider ever walked inside without supervision. As you approach, a low rumble rises through the water. Not from a storm, not from distant boats, from construction. An enormous galley is being launched. Workers chant in rhythmic bursts, pushing rollers beneath the hull. The galley slides forward inch by inch, then foot by foot, until finally it meets the water with a deep, satisfying splash. Ripples spread toward you, rocking your gondola gently, like a greeting from the newborn vessel. Historians still debate whether the Arsenale developed assembly line processes independently or whether it borrowed ideas from Eastern shipyards Venice encountered during its travels. Some believe it was inspired by Byzantine engineering. Others insist the Venetians invented the system entirely on their own. The truth may lie somewhere in between, but tonight, watching this place alive with purpose, you sense that Venetian ingenuity had a force of its own. The gondolier keeps you close to the action, circling slowly around the basin. You glimpse rowers practicing on a training platform, sailmakers stitching intricate patterns, officers inspecting tools, clerks scribbling measurements on parchment, blacksmiths dipping glowing metal into cold water, releasing clouds of steam. Everyone here moves with intent. Everyone here serves something larger than themselves. The Arsenale wasn't simply a workplace. It was the engine of an empire. Without it, Venice would have been just a cluster of islands. With it, Venice became a force feared from Constantinople to Alexandria, from Genoa to the Adriatic's farthest corners. You watch the newly launched galley bob gently, its hull glistening under lantern light. It seems restless, eager, alive, as if it knows the seas it will soon cross, the battles it will fight, the storms it will endure, the horizons it will chase. The gondolier turns away at last, guiding you back into the quieter canals as the shipyard's thunder fades behind you. The sound lingers in your chest, though a slow, powerful beat, because you've just witnessed the moment Venice transformed from a marshland refuge into a maritime republic. And the next chapter waits just around the bend, where merchants, sailors, and secrets will reshape the world one cargo crate at a time. The thunder of the Arsenale fades behind you until it feels like a distant memory, replaced by the gentler sounds of commerce. The creak of wooden docks, the splash of oars, the soft clatter of crates being shifted from one boat to another. You enter a canal broader than most, lined with warehouses whose wide doors open directly onto the water. The smell of resin and smoke is gone, replaced by something richer: spices, fish, wool, salt, and the faint sweetness of imported fruits. This is where Venice learned to speak the world's languages. Not with words, with trade. A boat passes you carrying sacks of grain, each marked with a painted sigil. Another glides by filled with terracotta jars sealed with wax. A third delivers long coils of rope, piled like sleeping serpents in the hull. Every object has a destination, a price, a purpose. Merchants stand on the docks debating values in rapid, melodic voices. They gesture broadly, laugh loudly, then suddenly grow serious as they examine a bolt of cloth or sniff a handful of peppercorns to judge its quality. A gondola ferrying scribes stops briefly at a floating platform where notaries check shipments and record weights on parchment rolls. One well-known fact defines Venice's rise more than any other. The city became Europe's gateway to the east, funneling goods from Constantinople, Cairo, and beyond into the continent. Silk, spices, glassware, dyes, furs, everything passed through Venetian hands, each transaction adding another brick to the Republic's wealth and power. A merchant waves to the gondolier as you drift past. His tunic is dyed a deep blue, a sign of affluence, and he carries a ledger under his arm, its pages thick with numbers. The gondolier nods back, but with the subtle restraint of someone acknowledging a superior while maintaining his own quiet dignity. In Venice, Every gesture was calibrated. Every nod had layers. Your gondola turns toward the Rialto, the beating heart of Venetian commerce long before the famous bridge became a photo backdrop. In its early centuries, the Rialto was rougher, louder, more chaotic. Wooden stalls crowded the water's edge. Barges jostled for space beneath makeshift awnings. Money changers called out rates for Byzantine coins, Arab dinars, and European silver pennies. The noise here is alive. Not frantic, but rhythmic. Workers unload crates of pepper, each worth a small fortune. A scribe records the transaction, noting the merchant's initials and the quantity before sealing the record with pitch. A group of sailors from the eastern Mediterranean walks by, their clothes a blend of local and foreign fabrics. They laugh together, their accents weaving a tapestry of languages. This is Venice's greatest miracle, a floating city that became the meeting point of empires. But alongside the great goods came stranger ones. Here lies a curiosity that once baffled foreign travelers. Venice imported mummies, actual Egyptian mummies, not for worship, not for display, but to grind them into medicinal powder that apothecaries claimed could cure nearly anything. The practice was both absurd and disturbingly popular. You drift past an apothecary shop where jars bearing strange labels line the shelves. Rose syrup, amber resin, powdered shells. Somewhere among them, you suspect, those ground remains once weighted in tiny packets marked Miraculum. Across the canal, a group of merchants clusters around a map pinned to a corkboard. Lines trace routes across the Mediterranean, each marked with tiny symbols, ships, coins, weather signs. They argue over winds near Crete, taxation in Cyprus, and rumors of pirates near Rhodes. The debate gets heated, then abruptly calm, then heated again. Commerce had no patience for fragile egos. And here you reach the debate scholars still wrestle with. Historians argue whether Venice's global dominance came from strategic genius or sheer geographic luck. Some claim the city simply sat at the crossroads of East and West. Others insist it exploited naval power, political cunning, and relentless mercantile ambition. But watching this place alive with movement, it feels like both arguments miss something essential. Venice didn't wait for opportunities. It built them, ship by ship, deal by deal, tide by tide. A merchant calls out to a sailor loading amphory. The sailor turns, revealing tattoos on his arms that seem older than the city itself. Spirals, waves, stars. Symbols of a life spent chasing horizons. He swings a jar into place with casual strength, then wipes his brow with a rag before climbing onto the boat's deck. He looks toward the sea with the same expression the new galley had earlier, anticipation. You drift closer to a floating market platform piled with fabrics. A woman runs her fingers over shimmering silk dyed in colors you've never seen before. Deep garnets, radiant golds, blues so rich they feel unreal. She haggles with a merchant whose patience seems infinite. Their exchange is a dance of numbers, gestures, and glances. In Venice, bargaining was not a battle, it was an art. Farther ahead, a wooden crane lifts a heavy crate from a barge. Ropes groan, pulleys creak, and the crate swings gently above the water before settling onto a dock. Workers pry it open to reveal trading beads, tiny glass trinkets destined for markets across the Adriatic. Even simple objects carried the potential for profit. The gondolier guides you past these scenes with quiet familiarity. He's not just transporting you. He's showing you what built Venice into a republic. Not force, but movement. Not conquest, but exchange. You feel the energy shifting again, almost imperceptibly. The noise softens. The docks thin. The buildings grow older and narrower. You're leaving the Rialto behind, moving toward a place where trade meets politics, where merchants shape laws and laws shape merchants. You sense what's waiting just ahead. A labyrinth of councils, secrets, and power, hidden behind beautiful facades. But you'll reach those halls soon enough. For now, let the merchants fade behind you, their voices blending into the water's soft repetition. Let the city turn another page. Let the next chapter rise quietly from the canal's gentle sway. The noise of the markets fades behind you until the canal narrows again, funneling you into a quieter, more solemn part of the city. The water grows darker, stiller. The buildings rise taller, casting long shadows over the gondola. You sense a shift, not just in sound or light, but in atmosphere. You're entering the part of Venice where decisions shaped continents, where power didn't shout, it whispered. The gondolier steers with deliberate care. Ahead, a vast open space reveals itself, a canal-side courtyard where the Doge's palace looms like a giant carved from pink stone and shadow. Its Gothic arches rise elegantly from the water, each one a gateway into centuries of secrets. Lanterns flicker beneath the arcades. A soft breeze stirs the banners that hang from narrow windows. This palace is beautiful, yes, but it is also a maze, a controlled maze, a political machine built as carefully as a galley hull. You glide toward a low dock beneath the palace arcade. Officials in long robes walk past carrying bundles of parchment. Their footsteps echo softly against the marble. A scribe sits at a small table near the water, dipping a quill into ink before writing with careful, deliberate strokes. The ink's glisten reflects in the canal like a thin streak of moonlight. This is Venice's true heart. Not the Arsenale, not the markets, but this labyrinth of councils, chambers, and secret rooms where power flowed like tide water. Quiet, unstoppable, precise. You drift beneath the arches. Shadows ripple across the water. Somewhere inside, you hear faint murmuring, debates, votes, whispers of alliances being shaped. You feel yourself entering a world where even silence has meaning. One well-known fact stands out. The Doge, Venice's highest official, had enormous prestige but surprisingly little personal freedom. He lived in this palace but was monitored constantly. Every decision he made required approval from councils. Even his mail was read by the state before he received it. Power here was a gilded cage. A guard walks by in chainmail, spear in hand. His steps are slow, disciplined. He doesn't acknowledge you, but you feel the gravity of his presence. Guards in Venice didn't protect individuals, they protected the system. There's a balcony above you, slender columns, delicate tracery. You imagine the Doge stepping out centuries ago, greeting ambassadors from distant lands, pretending to be the uncontested ruler of Venice, while knowing he was constrained at every step by layers of governance. The structure around him was vast. The Great Council, the Senate, the Council of 10, subcommittees, magistrates, special tribunals. Venice ran on meetings, on oaths, on paper, on the belief that no single man should ever hold too much power. But within this system lay shadows. You drift past a set of wooden doors carved with intricate patterns. Lions, waves, symbols of justice. Behind these doors once sat the Council of 10, the infamous body responsible for state security. They could order surveillance, interrogations, trials, even executions. Their power was feared yet accepted. In a city built on shifting water, stability was precious. And here lies a historical curiosity. Venice used secret letterboxes called Bocce di Leone, carved stone mouths where citizens could anonymously submit accusations. Some were sincere, some were vengeful, some changed destinies overnight. They fed the labyrinth with rumors, truths, and lies that the councils had to sift through carefully, sometimes painfully. You glide past one of these stone mouths set into a wall, its carved lips slightly parted. A small slot waits beneath. Even now, it feels alive, as if listening. The gondolier turns into an inner canal, so narrow it feels like a vein in the city's body. The palace walls loom close. Moss hangs from stones like old memories refusing to let go. Water drips rhythmically from a hidden gutter, each drop sounding like a soft metronome guiding the pace of this secretive world. Scholars still argue about the labyrinth's origins. Some insist Venice intentionally built the palace's political systems to prevent the rise of tyrants. Others argue it evolved from centuries of compromises between powerful families. The truth? Probably both, and probably neither. Venice always did things the Venetian way, its own way. Inside one glowing window, you glimpse council members sitting around a long table. Their robes shimmer faintly in lamplight. One man speaks softly, others lean in to listen. No one interrupts. Venice valued orderly debate, calm voices, strategic silences. Decisions were not rushed. They flowed like tides, slow, steady, unavoidable. You drift beneath the bridge of sighs, though in this early age, it isn't a romantic landmark. It's a passageway leading from interrogation chambers to prison cells, a place where the condemned caught their last glimpse of sunlight before descending into stone darkness. The gondoliers, or slows, just slightly. You inhale the cold air beneath the bridge, recognizing it as the breath of justice and fear intertwined. Beyond it, the palace stretches on, a labyrinth disguised as beauty. You pass courtyards where officials once debated naval policy, hallways where diplomats whispered, staircases worn by centuries of cautious footsteps, libraries filled with parchment whose ink once altered the fate of cities. The deeper you drift, the more the palace feels alive. Not with people, but with decisions. Every stone has a verdict behind it. Every carving carries a warning. Every corridor remembers secrets no historian ever wrote down. You realize now that Venice didn't rise because of geography alone. It didn't succeed because of ships alone. It flourished because it created a system that turned chaos into order, ambition into duty, power into service. Whether the system was fair, that's another matter, and one you'll sense soon enough. But for now, let the labyrinth hold you gently. Let its corridors whisper to you. Let the water beneath you echo centuries of choices. Because soon you will step out of these shadows and into the workshops, guilds, and hidden crafts that shaped Venetian life behind the scenes. The palace's shadows dissolve behind you as the gondola glides into narrower canals that feel warmer, more human. Laundry hangs overhead in strips of linen and wool. The smell of bread drifts from a distant bakery. Somewhere a dog barks once, then falls silent. Venice softens here, not in power, but in intimacy. You enter a district where the real work of the city happens. Not the symbolic ceremonial work of councils, but the labor of hands, skilled, calloused, precise. The gondolier knows the route instinctively, turning into a canal lined with wooden shutters, each marked by tiny signs or painted symbols indicating the crafts practiced inside. This is the Venice of artisans, of guilds, of quiet mastery. Your gondola passes a window where a glassblower's furnace glows, casting orange light onto the water. Inside, you glimpse a man turning molten glass at the end of a metal pipe. He rotates it slowly, then blows gently, shaping it into a delicate orb. His movements are practiced, almost meditative. Sweat glistens on his forehead. Every breath he releases becomes art. A well-known fact anchors moments like this. Venetian glassmakers were so valued and so controlled that for centuries they were required to live on the island of Murano. The law was strict. Too many secrets were at stake. Too much wealth depended on it. Glass here wasn't just decoration, it was innovation, diplomacy, and sometimes espionage. But tonight, you're drifting past the hidden workshops on the main islands, where apprentices practice techniques far from official eyes. Next, a narrow canal brings you beside a mask maker's shop. The windowsill is scattered with drying papier-mâché forms, half-finished masks with elongated noses, feline eyes, elegant curves. A woman inside paints a golden filigree pattern onto one, her brush strokes delicate and sure. She pauses only to tilt the mask into the lamplight, checking how the shimmer catches the air. Masks weren't just for carnival. They were tools. For privacy, for anonymity, for politics. Merchants used them during secret negotiations. Lovers wore them during late-night visits. Spies used them to slip through the city unnoticed. Across from the mask maker, a scribe works in a small room lined with parchment scrolls. His quill moves with steady precision. You hear soft scratching, almost hypnotic, as he copies a map of the Eastern Mediterranean. Beside him sits a magnifying glass, a jar of ink, and a small pot of sand to dry the page. His world is one of quiet detail, where a single misplaced stroke can change the journey of a ship. You drift onward, arriving at a workshop where boat builders craft gondolas. Two men lift a long, curved plank, aligning it against a nearly finished hull. The gondola is still bare, no black paint yet. Its wood exposed, its shape delicate and skeletal. A third man tests the curve by pressing his hand along the side. The wood bends slightly, alive with potential. There's a curiosity few realize. Early gondolas came in many colors, not just the iconic black. Some are blue, some red, some green. Bright colors once danced across the water like floating brushstrokes. Only later did Venice standardize the black finish, partly to hide signs of wealth, partly to maintain a formal, elegant uniformity. Further ahead, you pass a workshop with stacks of papers leaning against the wall, each bearing hand-inked illustrations, saints, ships, mythic beasts. Young apprentices grind pigments using marble tools. One crushes lapis lazuli into powder so fine it looks like a handful of sky. Another mixes the powder with oil, creating a paint more valuable than gold. This canal is alive with creation. Every window holds a different world. Every workshop a different dream. Scholars still debate the origins of certain guild traditions. Some claim Venice adopted Eastern apprenticeship methods through contact with Byzantine craftsmen. Others argue its guild system grew naturally from its maritime culture, where precision and hierarchy were already essential. No one fully agrees. But watching these artisans at work, you feel the truth is somewhere between influence and invention. Just like everything in Venice. The gondolier turns a corner, and you hear rhythmic tapping from an upstairs window. A woodcarver sits beside an open shutter, shaping a decorative panel for a church door. Chips of wood fall into the canal below, floating briefly before water softens their edges. His hands are steady. His eyes are focused. Each strike of the chisel is both art and prayer. Farther along, a leatherworker dips a strap into oil, then stretches it across a block to soften its fibers. Beside him, a young apprentice polishes metal buckles, laying them in neat rows on a cloth. Their workshop smells of oil, hide, and faint smoke. The city breathes through these crafts. It exists because ordinary hands do extraordinary work. You drift beneath a bridge covered in vines, entering a quieter stretch of canal where soft, golden light seeps from open shutters. A group of musicians practices in a nearby room, lute, pipe, and drum. The melody floats across the water, gentle and melancholy, as if the notes themselves are tired from a long day. The gondolier slows, letting the music envelop you. It settles into your bones like warmth. It lingers like memory. You realize something here. Venice wasn't built by nobles alone. It wasn't shaped only by councils or merchants. It was crafted by hands, thousands of them, each leaving a mark on a city that never truly finished growing. You drift forward, leaving the light of the workshops behind. Ahead lies another part of Venice, one ruled not by craft, but by ritual, spectacle, and ceremony. A world where the city transformed its daily life into theater. And that world waits just around the next turn. The workshops fade behind you, their warm lamplight dissolving into the soft hum of evening as the gondola glides toward a wider canal. Here, Venice shifts again. The air thickens with anticipation, as if the city itself is holding its breath in preparation for something grand. You sense it before you see it, a rising rhythm, a quiet expectation. Venice is about to perform. The gondolier steers toward a campo where a temporary wooden stage extends over the water. Lanterns hang in neat rows from ropes overhead, their flames flickering in the gentle breeze. People gather, merchants, fishermen, nobles, scribes, none distinguished by rank here. In Venice, ceremony was the great equalizer. Everyone played a part. Everyone watched. You drift closer just as a procession begins. Robed officials appear, carrying banners painted with lions, saints, waves, and stars. Musicians follow, their instruments gleaming in the lantern light. The crowd murmurs, not loudly, but reverently. Venice adored ceremony, not just for beauty, not just for tradition, but because spectacle was governance. Here comes the Doge, robed in gold and crimson, stepping slowly, deliberately. He holds a staff topped with a miniature winged lion. Children lean forward from balconies to see him. Sailors pause on nearby docks. A woman blesses herself as he passes. His presence is both political and theatrical. A well-known fact anchors what you witness. The Venetian Republic celebrated dozens of major festivals annually, many involving elaborate water processions. Some honored victories, some honored saints, some strengthened alliances, some reminded everyone who truly held authority. But beneath the grandeur lies a curiosity. Certain rituals were intentionally strange, like the ceremony where the Doge married the sea by throwing a gold ring into the water. Foreign visitors found it baffling. Locals saw it as sacred. Symbol and spectacle fused into one. The procession reaches the water's edge. Musicians shift into a slower melody, a blend of strings and flutes that drifts across the lagoon like incense. The Doge boards a small ceremonial boat decorated with crimson fabric and golden carvings. A group of oarsmen, dressed in matching tunics, rows with perfect synchronicity. You drift behind them, keeping a respectful distance. The lanterns reflect on the water like scattered stars. Voices echo softly from every corner of the canal. Other boats join the procession, guild representatives carrying tools, priests carrying relics, sailors carrying flags from foreign lands. Every guild, every trade, every corner of the city has a place in this aquatic theater. Even the water seems to quiet itself as the procession glides forward. Your gondola slips among the shadows of the palaces lining the Grand Canal. Women lean from balconies holding candles. Children wave small paper lanterns. An old man hums along with the musicians, his voice blending with the oar's gentle splash. Scholars still debate the origins of some Venetian ceremonies. Did they evolve from Byzantine court rituals, or were they native traditions refined over centuries? Some point to similarities with Eastern empires. Others insist Venice invented its own brand of political theater. The debate lingers like incense smoke, fragrant, complex, and impossible to pin down. The gondolier turns into a side canal, following a smaller procession branching off from the main event. This one is quieter, more intimate. You see hooded figures carrying candles. Their faces are hidden, their steps synchronized. They move toward a nearby chapel, where a priest holds a lantern aloft, casting warm circles of light onto the water. These nighttime rituals weren't always religious. Some honored fallen sailors. Some marked the changing tides. Some were simply moments of communal memory, where Venice reminded itself that it wasn't just a place, it was a shared story. Ahead, a floating platform holds dancers wearing the masks you saw earlier. Their movements are slow and deliberate. Silk robes trail behind them as they turn, their reflections spinning in the water beneath like ghostly doubles. Music swells, a gentle, hypnotic rhythm that feels half lullaby, half spell. Everything seems to pause. Even the breeze waits. Ceremony was how Venice kept itself alive. Not physically, politically, by reminding each citizen that they were part of something larger than themselves. A republic built not on land, not on wealth, not on conquest, but on belonging. You drift beneath a bridge where families have gathered with lanterns placed on the parapet. The flames flicker in the wind. Children whisper excitedly. A woman adjusts her shawl and smiles softly at the passing boats. The scene feels timeless, as if this festival has happened for centuries, as if it will continue long after you drift away. The gondolier slows as the music softens. The dancers complete their final turn. The lanterns sway gently overhead. The Doge's boat glides away into the night, its golden prow catching the moonlight. The ceremony dissolves, not abruptly, but gracefully, like the end of a long sigh. You drift onward, the echoes fading behind you. Ahead lies a darker truth, a shadow that skipped no ceremony, the plague, and the city's long struggle against it. But not yet. The night is still gentle. The water is calm. Let this moment linger a little longer. The soft glow of lanterns fades behind you as the gondola slips into a quieter, darker canal. Here, the air feels different, heavier, colder, touched by a memory the city never fully escaped. The water reflects faint moonlight in broken fragments. Even the gondolier's strokes become slower, more deliberate, as if paying respect to the silence that lingers here. Venice is beautiful at night, but beneath that beauty lives a shadow, one that shaped its laws, its rituals, its architecture, its very soul. You drift toward a canal leading to a cluster of old stone buildings, their windows shuttered, their doors reinforced. These structures once housed those who guarded the city not with swords or ships, but with observation, isolation, and heartbreaking duty. The plague. It came in waves, swift, merciless, and so frequent that Venetians learned to live with the expectation of loss. A well-known fact sets the stage. Venice established some of Europe's earliest quarantine stations, lazaretti, on isolated lagoon islands. Ships suspected of carrying infection were required to anchor for 40 days, 40 giorni, the origin of the modern word quarantine. Goods were fumigated. Travelers were monitored. Letters were pierced with needles to disinfect them with vinegar. You drift past one of the canals leading outward toward the islands. In the distance, the silhouette of a lazaretto rises. Low walls, narrow windows, a watchtower overlooking the dark lagoon. In the moonlight, it looks peaceful, almost tender, but its history is anything but. The gondolier avoids that direction. Out of respect, out of memory, you turn instead toward a narrower canal, where pale torchlight flickers from a wooden balcony. A masked physician stands silently above the water, the long-beaked mask reflecting the wavering flame. His hands rest on the railing. His cloak hangs motionless. It's unclear whether he watches you or watches his own thoughts drifting across the canal. The plague doctor's mask, bird-like, eerie, iconic, was meant to protect him, filled with herbs and vinegar-soaked cloth. Yet many physicians still fell ill. Many died. Their bravery was quiet. Their fear was constant. Somewhere behind a shuttered window, a woman sings a soft lullaby. It's not cheerful. It's not sad. It's simply present, the kind of song people sang when they didn't know what tomorrow would bring. You drift beneath a small bridge where two men once stood during outbreaks, carrying long poles tipped with hooks. They used them to pass food to infected households without touching the walls or people. Those poles were called battoni della misericordia, rods of mercy. A small mercy, but a real one. Scholars still debate the origins of Venice's plague responses. Some argue the Republic adopted Byzantine medical ideas. Others say its system emerged independently from maritime necessity. The truth may be somewhere in the murky waters between. Your gondola glides past a doorway marked with faded red paint. These marks once warned neighbors that illness lived within. They signaled danger, but also solidarity, reminding passers-by to leave food, water, and prayer offerings on the steps. A curiosity floats to mind. Venetians believed that garlic, rosemary smoke, and the ringing of bells could push plague vapors away. Some wore charms, some burned herbs, some simply avoided speaking loudly, fearing the breath itself could carry death. Along a darker alley, a faint metallic sound echoes, clinking chains. You round a corner and understand why. Two city watchmen emerge from a narrow passage, lanterns in hand, their chain belts rattling softly. They patrol not for thieves, but for health violators, people attempting to hide symptoms or flee isolation. Their duty was harsh and sometimes heartbreaking. You drift past, and they neither nod nor speak. Their silence feels like part of the night. Above, laundry hangs stiff and unmoving, forgotten by families who fled to safer districts. Some windows are nailed shut. Others glow faintly with candlelight, souls awake in worry, keeping vigil. The gondolier stops rowing for a moment. The gondola coasts. You hear the water more clearly, the slow lapping against stones, the faint trickle from a gutter, the whisper of a breeze moving through narrow channels. This is Venice remembering, not to frighten you, but to remind you that every marble facade, every festival, every triumph was earned through survival. In the next bend, you pass a small chapel built atop layers of older structures. Candles line its entrance. During outbreaks, priests stood here, offering blessings from a distance. They held up icons through the windows, their voices echoing prayer into canals that carried more sorrow than sound. And yet Venice endured. It endured because its people adapted, because its leaders took risks, because its doctors faced danger with steady hands, because its citizens learned to live with loss, without letting it drain the light from their city. The gondolier resumes rowing. Slow, gentle, respectful. Soon, the narrow canal will open into a wider, wind-touched space where fog gathers and floods rise, a place shaped not by illness, but by weather. But for now, let this shadow settle around you without fear. Let the quiet honor the past. Let the water carry the memory gently onward. Because Venice's relationship with danger, whether plague, storm, or tide, is the very reason it survived long enough to become a dream. The canal widens once more until the air around you shifts, brimming with the raw moodiness that only Venice's weather can summon. The gondola glides into a stretch of water where fog clings low, so low it brushes your shoulders like cool fingertips. The horizon dissolves. The city fades. The line between water and sky vanishes entirely. Venice doesn't simply have weather. It wears it. Fog, especially, has always been part of the city's personality. It rolls in like a visiting relative, uninvited, unpredictable, yet strangely comforting. The kind of fog that absorbs sound until even your breath feels too loud. The gondolier pushes forward slowly, reading the thickness of the mist like someone reading Braille. His or barely ripples the water. You can't see the buildings clearly, yet you feel them, their presence like silent giants just out of view. A well-known fact drifts into your mind as you move through the pale cloud. Venice's fog once rivaled London's, not from pollution, but from a natural temperature dance between the lagoon and open sea. Merchants delayed travel because of it. Bells rang more frequently to guide boats. Lovers often got lost in it, sometimes intentionally. A faint bell tolls in the distance now. Soft, muffled, lonely. Then the fog breaks for a moment, and you see a flooded stone walkway ahead. Not severely, just a thin sheet of water covering the steps, reflecting the sky like a silver mirror. Venetians have a name for this phenomenon. Aqua alta, the high water. Tonight, it is gentle. But in history, it rose unpredictably, sometimes filling homes, sometimes carrying furniture down canals, sometimes forcing families to sleep on upper floors until tides receded. You drift across the reflective surface as if gliding over a polished jewel. A small wooden walkway floats nearby, strips of planks supported by simple legs. Venetians carried these through streets during floods like portable bridges, unfolding them whenever the sea decided to visit the living room. The gondolier taps the oar lightly on the stone edge as he passes, listening for the echo. It's an old technique. If the echo returns clearly, the fog is thinning. If not, the fog is thickening. Tonight, the fog only sighs back. You pass beneath an arch where ropes hang from iron rings, drying in the cool air. They drip slowly into the water, little rhythmic taps marking the passing time. Behind a shutter, you hear voices murmuring about tomorrow's tide chart. Venetians have always lived on the edge of the unpredictable, reading the sea the way farmers read seasons. A curiosity slips into thought. In medieval times, some Venetians believed floods happened because the sea was jealous of human celebrations, especially weddings. They claimed the water rose higher when the city was too joyful, as if demanding to be included. You smile at the image. The lagoon sulking after being left off the guest list. But weather wasn't always whimsical. Storms hit Venice with sudden violence. Winds cracking against wooden docks, waves slamming into foundations, lightning illuminating the canals like glowing rivers. Families reinforced their doors with iron bars. Gondoliers tied their vessels deep inside covered slips. Boats overturned. Markets flooded. Fish swam where merchants normally stood. Scholars still debate how early Venetians predicted storms. Some insist they relied on detailed tide charts and wind calendars. Others argue they learned patterns simply through generations of observation. Both explanations hold truth. But drifting here tonight, you sense the real answer. Venetians survived by listening to silence, to currents, to subtle cues no outsider would ever notice. A gust of wind lifts the fog briefly, revealing the dark silhouettes of chimneys and crooked rooftops. The mist curls around them like living fabric. A cat leaps across a narrow alley's rooftop bridge, its silhouette sharp against the glow of a distant lantern. Then the fog returns, softer this time, more forgiving. Like a blanket, the night gently pulls back over the city. The gondolier slows near a long, open stretch of water where the tide rises more boldly. The moon emerges, pale and wavering, its reflection broken by gentle ripples. You can almost see the heartbeat of the lagoon, slow, steady, pulling the city up and letting it sink in a patient rhythm. This tidal breath is Venice's oldest companion. It raised her. It threatened her. It sustained her. You drift through the shimmering water, listening to it lap against the stones. Every splash feels like a whispered confession. Every ripple an old memory. The fog begins to thin, just enough to see the next stretch of canal waiting ahead. The buildings return from shadow. Lanterns gleam like stars caught in water. You sense what awaits just beyond the mist. Night in Venice. Mysterious, theatrical, intimate. A world illuminated by oil lamps and kept alive by voices drifting across canals. But for now, let the fog cling a little longer. Let the high water shimmer beneath you. Let the lagoon breathe around you. Let the weather be your quiet companion. The fog thins as you drift onward, dissolving into strands of silver that linger in the corners of alleys and hover above still water. The city around you changes once more. It exhales. It slows. It softens. Night doesn't merely arrive in Venice. It settles into the canals like a storyteller taking a seat beside you. The gondolier lights a small lantern at the bow. Its glow flickers across the dark surface, scattering trembling reflections that dance with each ripple. The water turns from shimmering gray to deep obsidian, luminous in the places touched by light. The world narrows to what you can see in that modest circle of gold. Venice at night is an entirely different city. The day belongs to labor. The evening belongs to sound. But the night belongs to secrets. You drift past narrow windows where candles burn low behind warped glass. Shadows move inside. Someone preparing a late meal, a scholar reading, a seamstress finishing a garment by lamplight. The city does not sleep entirely. It simply hushes. A gondolier on a nearby canal sings softly. Not for tourists. There are none here, but for rhythm, for company, for the city itself. His voice echoes in gentle arcs, bouncing off stone walls and returning slightly changed, as if the canal wants to sing its own harmony. The melody folds into the night like warm cloth. A well-known fact floats into your thoughts. Before gaslight, Venice navigated nighttime canals almost entirely by lanterns and memory. Watchmen patrolled, lanterns swinging from long poles. Gondoliers memorized every contour of the waterways, every sharp turn, every shallow patch. Some carried small bells to alert other boats. But mostly, they trusted their instincts. A soft splash cuts through the quiet. A fish leaps, then disappears. The ripples travel outward. A brief, delicate fingerprint on the canal. You pass beneath a stone bridge illuminated by lanterns hanging from iron hooks. Their glow spills through the arches, turning the underside of the bridge into a chamber of gold and shadow. Above, footsteps echo lightly, someone crossing from one life moment to another. The gondolier glides you into a long, narrow canal flanked by tall buildings whose upper floors lean together as if whispering secrets overhead. Lanterns shine from balconies, their flames small but determined. The reflections ripple like liquid stars. You hear footsteps on wooden planks. The night watch. Two men in cloaks walk side by side, holding lanterns and long staves. They pause at intervals, listening for disturbances. Their job wasn't glamorous, but crucial. They guarded against thieves, fires, and more mysterious dangers lurking in unlit corners. There's a curiosity whispered through Venetian folklore. Many believe that the night watch could hear the lagoon itself speaking. Not words, never words, but warnings. A sudden breeze, an unexpected shift in the water, a sound repeated twice. Signs that something was about to happen. Scholars still debate the accuracy of those tales. Some view them as myths born of superstition. Others argue they reflect genuine observational expertise passed down through generations. Tonight, in this narrow canal, you feel both explanations breathing side by side. Farther ahead, the gondolier turns into a broader waterway. Lanterns line the path like guiding spirits. Several gondoliers rest at a boathouse, sharing quiet conversation, their voices carried gently across the water. They speak in Venetian dialect, untranslatable if you haven't grown up listening to tides as punctuation. One man laughs softly. Another exhales. The water reflects them in wavering silhouettes. Somewhere nearby, a lute plays. A simple, melancholic melody drifting from a window left open to the night. The notes fall slowly, as if reluctant to touch the water. You feel your shoulders loosen. Your breathing settles. The city cradles you. This softness is deliberate. Night in Venice was not meant to be feared. It was meant to be lived in, listened to, and understood. You drift beneath another bridge where lanterns cast thin columns of light into the dark. Dust motes dance in the beams like tiny, floating spirits. The gondola glides through them, scattering the particles into shimmering swirls. Ahead, a small courtyard opens directly onto the water. The lanterns here brighter, the air a little warmer. A baker places fresh loaves on a shelf to cool before dawn. A fisherman mends a net with quiet concentration. A couple strolls hand in hand along a narrow walkway, whispering secrets into the night air. The intimacy of it all settles into you like a quilt. Venice built its reputation on power, trade, ceremony, but its soul lived in nights like this. Nights where the city hummed with quiet life, where the canals carried stories more than boats, where lanterns painted worlds within worlds on the water surface. The gondolier steers you down a final narrow path where lanterns float on small wooden discs, an old tradition meant to guide late-night sailors home. Their warm glow seems to call you forward, deeper into the city's embrace. But ahead lies something different, the quiet fading of power, the whispered currents of espionage and secrets, a world where night doesn't just soothe, it listens. Let the lanterns fade behind you. Let their reflections ripple softly. Let night hold your thoughts like gently cupped hands. Because the next chapter reveals how Venice used darkness not just for rest, but for strategy, shadow, and survival. The lantern-lit calm behind you dissolves as the gondola carries you into a darker, quieter artery of the city, one where windows are shuttered, footsteps fade quickly, and whispers seem to linger longer than they should. You sense immediately that this part of Venice was built not for beauty, not for trade, not even for ceremony, but for watching. And for listening. Venice was many things: merchant republic, maritime power, festival haven, architectural marvel. But beneath all of that, woven into its foundations like hidden support beams, Venice was a spy network, perhaps the most sophisticated Europe had ever known. You feel in the air now, the way the buildings seem to lean in, the way the water carries every tiny sound, the way shadows gather in corners like observers waiting to take note. The gondolier rows softly, barely disturbing the water surface. He knows this route. Everyone in Venice knew when they were moving through a district where the Republic preferred silence. A faint tapping echoes from somewhere up ahead, something small against stone. Not threatening, but rhythmic. Someone closing shutters. Someone signaling. Or someone simply locking away secrets for the night. One well-known fact sets the tone for what unfolds here. Venice maintained vast archives of intelligence reports, encrypted letters, diplomatic analyses, and secret testimonies. Much of it stored in guarded chambers within the Doge's palace. These records were so extensive that some scholars argue Venice invented the earliest form of what we now call a centralized intelligence service. The canal narrows. Lanterns fade. The gondola slides beneath a low arch where the air cools noticeably. You hear the drip of water from overhead and the soft slap of the oar. Beyond the arch, a quiet courtyard opens to the sky, a place where two cloaked figures stand talking in hushed tones. When they see you, they immediately fall silent and disappear down separate alleys. This wasn't uncommon in Old Venice. Secrets traveled faster than gondolas. You drift forward, and your eyes adjust to the deeper shadows. A small bridge rises ahead, its stone parapet worn smooth by centuries of elbows leaning over it. You hear the faint scratch of pen on parchment. Turning toward the sound, you glimpse a scribe sitting under a narrow overhang, writing by lantern light. His workspace is modest, a wooden box, a pile of folded messages, and a small chest sealed with wax. Every so often he makes a mark in a ledger, pauses, listens, then continues writing. He looks like an ordinary clerk at first glance. But in Venice, the ordinary was often camouflage. This scribe may be copying a trade license, or decoding intelligence sent from Constantinople. You drift on. A chill runs through the air, not from wind but from atmosphere. You realize you've entered a district near the offices of the Signori di Notte, the Lords of the Night, officials responsible for policing, surveillance, and nighttime security. They worked quietly, constantly, unseen by most citizens. Their authority stretched through taverns, markets, docks, and every alley where trouble or treason could hide. As you pass, a side door opens briefly. A man in a dark robe steps out, glances at the canal, then closes the door without a sound. You catch only a glimpse of the parchment in his hand, bearing a red wax seal with a winged lion pressed deep into it. A signal that whatever he carries belongs to the state, and not the kind of message meant for public eyes. A curiosity floats into your awareness. Venice trained professional eavesdroppers, listeners stationed near palace rooms, taverns, even certain bridges, to gather intelligence from seemingly casual conversations. Some were officials. Some were paid informants. Some were simply citizens rewarded for their silence. That's the unsettling truth about this place. Almost anyone could be listening. Almost anything could be reported. Almost any whisper could travel through these canals into the heart of the state. Scholars still debate the origins of Venice's obsession with espionage. Some argue it emerged from necessity. Surrounded by enemies, Venice needed early warnings. Others claim it stemmed from distrust within the Republic's own patrician families. Which explanation is more accurate? The truth is probably both. Fear without and ambition within. You drift through a canal so narrow you could touch both walls if you stretch your arms. Wooden shutters hang partly open, casting angled slivers of light onto the water. Behind one window, you hear voices arguing in low tones, two merchants discussing a shipment, or two diplomats negotiating something more delicate. The gondolier slows, not wanting to disturb whatever transaction or conspiracy unfolds behind the shutters. A soft splash echoes from behind you, another gondola following at a distance. You don't see it clearly, but you sense it. Maybe it's a simple passenger, maybe an official shadowing someone. In Venice, following boats was neither rare nor suspicious. It was procedure. The gondolier turns left onto a canal shrouded in darkness, except for a single lantern flickering on a distant pier. The flame bends in the breeze, casting long, trembling shadows across the water. Here, the city feels almost sentient, watchful, alert. A wooden door opens above you. A small paper packet drops into a waiting boat below. No words are exchanged. The boat rows away swiftly. You drift past the doorway moments later. It's already closed. Only the faint scent of warmed wax remains. These canals carried messages the way veins carry blood, quietly, constantly, without ever stopping. Another archway leads you toward a building with thick walls, almost fortress-like. You feel the air shift. This is near the archival chambers where the Council of Ten kept classified reports, testimonies, accusations, diplomatic intelligence, encoded letters from afar. Few ever saw these rooms. Fewer still understood the full scope of information stored there. But many feared them. Above, you see carved stone faces built into the wall, grotesques and masks staring down at the canal. They look decorative to the untrained eye. But some of them served subtle purposes. To hide listeners behind thin marble screens. To disguise channels where sound traveled unusually well. To create vantage points where guards could observe without being seen. You drift beneath those silent watchers. Your reflection wavers beneath them like a whispered admission. This is Venice at her most guarded, quiet, analytical, calculating. A republic that used beauty as a disguise. Commerce as a lure. Intelligence as a shield. The gondolier turns sharply, guiding you away from the shadow-heavy corridors and back toward a broader canal where lantern light stretches across the water in long ribbons. The air feels lighter here. You breathe more easily, but you carry something with you now. An understanding that beneath every celebration, beneath every painted facade, beneath every graceful gondola ride, Venice was listening. She always listened. And soon, you'll see what she heard. When enemies gathered at her horizons, and threats rose from every corner of the known world. The broad canal ahead feels different. Open, wind-touched, restless. The gondola drifts into a channel where the city seems to pull back on either side, revealing long lines of rooftops silhouetted against a dim sky. The air carries a sharper edge here. The faint smell of salt, the hint of distant waves striking unseen shores. Venice may be a city of water, but it is also a city of borders, always alert to the world beyond its shimmering lagoon. The gondolier rows with firmer strokes now. His posture changes. His jaw tightens. Even he can feel the shift. You are entering Venice's outer consciousness, the part of the city that never slept easily, that always listened for threats drifting across horizons like storm clouds. For all its beauty, Venice lived in a state of perpetual vigilance. Out here, the museums and palaces fall away. The facades become simpler, the docks more austere. Watchtowers rise like stone guardians. Wooden platforms extend into the lagoon where guards once stood scanning the waters through the night. A well-known fact anchors this entire section. The Venetian Republic fought bitter rivalries, most famously against Genoa, the Ottoman Empire, and various European powers, each vying for control of Mediterranean trade and naval supremacy. These were not small skirmishes. They were century-defining rivalries. To drift here is to feel those tensions echo across time. A distant wooden structure rises from the water, an old lookout post. Its timbers lean with age, its rope ladder dangling loosely. In its prime, a sentinel stood here nightly, scanning for enemy sails, smoke, or suspicious lights. Venice learned early that danger rarely sends a polite introduction. You glide past it as the wind combs the water into thin ripples. Then you hear the distant thump of waves against a stone embankment. It's deeper water here, closer to the edges of the city. The gondola rocks gently as it passes, the lagoon reminding you of its wildness. Venice thrived in this liminal space, not fully sea, not fully land, protected by geography, yet threatened by it. Your gondolier pauses at an opening where the lagoon widens into a quiet, expansive silver plain. It looks peaceful now, but centuries ago, this calm surface hid fleets, strategies, ambushes, and acts of espionage. Here, naval battles shaped empires. A curiosity floats to mind as you drift. Venice once built entire floating fortresses, massive defensive rafts anchored in key positions to block enemy ships. These weren't small platforms. They housed soldiers, cannons, barricades. They turned patches of open water into temporary islands of war. From this vantage point, you can almost see them being maneuvered across the lagoon, their crews rowing furiously while shouting orders, their flags snapping in the wind. Farther along, you reach a quieter canal where the buildings grow more fortified. Small arrow-slit windows appear in stone walls. Wooden shutters are reinforced with iron bands. These were not homes. They were defensive stations, ready to withstand attacks that could arrive at dawn or midnight. The gondolier steers you beside a stone platform where 3 tall poles rise. These once held the ensigns of Venice's naval commanders. When raised, the flags signaled readiness for battle or the return of victorious galleys. When lowered, the entire city felt the shift: fear, relief, mourning, triumph. Scholars still debate the most dangerous foe Venice ever faced. Some argue it was the Ottomans, whose immense naval power threatened the Republic's Eastern trade routes. Others insist Genoa was more dangerous because its rivalry with Venice was deeply personal. 2 mirror-image republics challenging each other for the same throne of maritime dominance. Both arguments hold weight. Both define chapters of Venetian history. But drifting here, it feels like Venice's true enemy was always uncertainty. A gust of wind sweeps across the water. You hear the faint flap of a stray cloth somewhere on a rooftop. A shutter bangs once, then settles. The city seems to inhale slowly, remembering centuries of vigilance. The gondolier pushes onward. You enter a stretch of canal lined with old warehouses used for storing weapons, crossbows, oars, sails, and even the early prototypes of gunpowder devices. Their doors are thick, their hinges iron-forged. The walls are scarred with marks left by carts, crates, and hurried preparations. This was where the Republic stocked the lifeblood of its fleets. Above you, a single lantern burns in a guard tower. Its reflection flickers across the water in uneven strokes. A lone guard once stood here through storm and fog, scanning the shifting shadows for signs of danger. A gondola passes yours coming from the opposite direction. Inside are 2 men in official robes. They nod faintly at your gondolier, an acknowledgement of shared purpose. Perhaps they are members of the Maritime Council. Perhaps they are carrying urgent reports. Perhaps they are simply part of the unending rhythm of governance that kept Venice vigilant. You drift toward an inlet where the water darkens from depth. The gondolier slows, letting you absorb the horizon, a long, silent line dividing the lagoon from the open sea. It feels like the edge of the world. Venice built itself on this seam not by accident, but by design. To control the sea, you must live close enough to hear its warnings. A wooden pier stretches into the water, its planks worn by centuries of boots, sailors, captains, fishermen, messengers. From this spot, countless departures took place. Fleets bound for war, merchants bound for distant markets, envoys bound for dangerous negotiations. The air here is salted with memory. Another curiosity emerges from history. During tense diplomatic periods, Venice employed mirror signaling across the lagoon. Sunlight flashed from tower to tower, conveying coded messages instantly, without needing couriers. A simple trick, yet remarkably advanced for its time. You can almost imagine such flashes now, bright solar pulses leaping across the water. The gondolier turns the boat around slowly, his silhouette framed by the vast silver of the lagoon behind him. The city's rooftops come back into view, rising like a jagged crown against the night. Venice survived because it watched. It waited. It calculated. It chose its battles carefully, sometimes too carefully, sometimes not carefully enough. The gondola glides back toward the inner canals, leaving the horizon behind. You feel the transition as the lagoon's openness gives way to the city's embrace. The channels narrow. The wind quiets. The echoes soften. Venice's enemies always waited on its borders, but so did its resolve. And as you drift away from the horizon, you sense what comes next. The cost of all this vigilance. The wealth. The beauty. the burden. Because the empire that shone brightest often cast the longest shadow. The gondola drifts back into the winding interior of the city, where the canals become calmer, narrower, more ornamented. The water shimmers with the reflections of tall, elegant facades, marble balconies, Gothic arches, and carved lion heads that watch from every corner like guardians of an ancient dream. The air here feels richer, scented with beeswax, fresh bread, and the faint perfume of incense drifting from open windows. This is Venice at the height of its brilliance. Not the quiet refuge of fishermen, not the disciplined engine of the Arsenale, not the shadowed corridors of surveillance. Here lies the Venice the world remembers, the gilded, the radiant, the impossibly adorned. But beneath the beauty, there is always a cost. The gondolier guides you beneath a bridge decorated with stone carvings of saints and sea creatures. Above, a noblewoman leans on the railing, her gown shimmering with Venetian brocade. She watches the water as if contemplating something far away, her expression serene yet distant. Around her neck glints a piece of Murano glass, shaped like a tear. She is elegant, adorned, and entirely dependent on a system built by laborers whose names will never enter the history books. A well-known fact emerges as you observe this world of ornament. Venetian palaces were designed with plain exteriors facing the street and lavish facades facing the canals. The city cared less about impressing its pedestrians and more about impressing those who travel by boat: merchants, diplomats, visiting nobles. Wealth here was advertised to those who mattered. You drift closer to one such palace, its lower floor rising directly from the water. The marble is veined with delicate reds and greens, reflecting softly on the canal surface. A gondola waits outside like a horse-drawn carriage at a noble estate. Two servants stand inside the entryway, speaking quietly as they prepare for the household's evening meal. Inside the open windows, you glimpse chandeliers flickering with hundreds of oil lamps. Music drifts outward, the soft, intricate tones of a small ensemble tuning their instruments. Somewhere deeper inside the building, servants hurry up staircases carrying dishes of fish, lemon, herbs, and sweet pastries. And yet, as you drift along these palaces, you begin to notice the weight of their beauty. Venice did not become wealthy by accident. It extracted, traded, negotiated, and sometimes exploited. A curiosity surfaces, one that often remains hidden beneath the city's glamour. The wealth fueling Venice's golden age relied heavily on the labor of sailors, rowers, servants, and enslaved people captured or purchased from across the Mediterranean. They built the ships. They rowed the galleys. They carried the grain. They cleaned the floors of palaces they could never enter except to serve. The gondolier glances ahead as you pass another doorway, where workers unload crates from a barge. Their clothes are simple, their bodies tired. One carries a heavy sack of grain on his shoulder. Another hauls rope coiled like a serpent. Their voices are rough, their laughter sharp, their movements practiced. These laborers kept the city alive, but they rarely walked its grand halls. And this brings you to one of Venice's most debated truths. Historians still argue whether Venetian society was more equitable than other European states or whether its aristocracy maintained an unusually tight grip on wealth and power. Depending on the century you examine, both interpretations carry truth. Sometimes Venice allowed social mobility. Sometimes it sealed its patrician ranks like a vault. The gondola turns into a wider canal where a lavish procession floats past, a noble family returning from celebration. Their gondola is draped in embroidered fabric, their servants wearing ribbons around their collars. Music echoes from within the boat, a soft lute melody, accompanied by a woman singing in a clear, warm voice. The sound floats across the water like a blessing. But even in such beauty, you sense the tension beneath. Not anger, but awareness. The awareness that wealth produces envy, security produces caution, and beauty produces responsibility. You drift farther, passing a market where vendors pack up their stalls for the night. One sells fruit from distant orchards, Another sells cured meats. A third arranges leftover herbs into bundles. A child runs by carrying a loaf of bread, still warm from a communal oven. Life continues here, simple, earnest, unadorned. Then you notice something else. The separation between worlds. In the palaces, candles burn in crystal holders. In the markets, candles burn in plain bowls of fat. In the palaces, silk drapes shimmer from balconies. In the streets, wool blankets hang from windows. In the palaces, the music is ordered, refined. In the alleys, the music is improvised, fiddles, drums, laughter. Venice was a city of contrasts, but also a city that embraced those contrasts without shame. As you glide past a row of elegant buildings, you spot a small, open doorway leading to a dimly lit workshop. A man sits inside, carving decorative patterns into a wooden beam. His hands are steady. He hums to himself. Behind him, a woman spins thread on a simple wheel. Their work is humble, yet the palace above them may very well rest on the beams they shape. This is the cost of empire. Not cruelty alone, not inequality alone, but the constant exchange between visible grandeur and invisible labor. You drift past a final palace where lanterns glow along the balconies. A banquet unfolds on the upper floor, laughter, clinking glasses, warm light spilling onto the water. Below it, on the servant level, a young man carries a stack of plates, his back bent slightly from fatigue. He looks out the window briefly, watching you pass. For a moment, his eyes meet yours. There's no resentment there, just the quiet understanding of someone whose life keeps the city balanced. The gondolier guides you onward as the grand facades fade into simpler homes. You feel the shift. From outward splendor to inward truth. The next stretch of water leads you toward a different kind of story, not the rise of Venice, but the long, slow turning of its fortune as the world began to change. Let the palaces glow behind you. Let their reflections soften into ripples. Let the city's beauty remain, but let its weight linger just long enough to understand what comes next. The city narrows again as the gondola drifts forward, slipping through a quieter corner of Venice where the air feels older, heavier, touched by the weight of centuries. The lanterns flickering above these canals burn a little dimmer, their flames stirring gently in a breeze. The gondolier rows slowly, his strokes quieter now, as if matching the mood of the waters beneath you. This part of the city feels different. Not abandoned, not neglected, but quieter, as though time itself has paused here to consider its next move. Venice once seemed unshakable, a miracle drifting on the sea, a republic that had outlasted kingdoms, popes, emperors, storms, plagues, and conspiracies. But even the greatest empires eventually find themselves facing currents they can't fully control. You drift past a row of aging houses leaning toward the canal. Their plaster is cracked, their bricks exposed. Plants spill from windowsills, green, vibrant, oblivious to the slow decay. Laundry hangs motionless in the night. A cat curls atop a wooden crate beside the water, blinking drowsily as you pass. A gondola moored nearby creaks softly with each ripple. Venice is still beautiful, but you can feel the shift. A turning, a subtle imbalance. A well-known fact explains one of the forces behind this change. When the Portuguese discovered new ocean routes to India around the Cape of Good Hope, Venice's dominance over Eastern trade began to crumble. The spices that once filled Venetian coffers now traveled by ship down the coast of Africa, bypassing the Mediterranean entirely. It was as if someone had unplugged the Republic from its own lifeline. You pass a merchant's warehouse, once bustling, now quiet. A few workers linger on the dock, rolling barrels with slow, deliberate care. No hurried shouts, no frantic loading, just the quiet rhythm of a trade that isn't what it used to be. Farther along, a shipyard slip sits empty. Ropes dangle from wooden posts like forgotten threads. A single lantern burns on a hook, casting a soft glow on the water. These docks once launched fleets that ruled distant seas. Now, they seem to wait for a purpose that hasn't arrived. Another curiosity emerges as you drift past a row of small shops. Some historians claim that Venetian merchants resisted adapting to New World markets because they were bound by traditional investments and political agreements. Others argue the Republic adapted as best it could, but the shifts were simply too vast, too fast. Either way, the ripple effects were unmistakable. The gondola glides into a broader canal where noble palaces stand tall, but now their reflections shimmer with a faint melancholy. You can sense the change not in their grandeur, still immense, but in the quiet surrounding them. Fewer lights, fewer servants at the doors. Wealth still exists, but it feels static, inherited rather than earned. A lone musician plays on a balcony, just a soft melody on a lute. The notes drift through the night like wistful memories. Next, you pass a small bridge where two men stand talking in hushed tones. Their cloaks flutter in the breeze. You catch snippets, words like debts, markets, taxes. Their expressions are troubled. Venice had once dictated the rules of Mediterranean trade. Now it negotiated, compromised, adapted. Scholars still debate which turning point struck hardest. Was it the rise of the Ottoman Empire's control over eastern ports? The Portuguese discovering sea routes? The cost of endless naval wars? Or internal stagnation among Venice's ruling families? All have merit. All played a role. The gondola enters a narrow water passage where the walls seem to grow darker. Above you, old wooden beams jut out, their edges swollen from humidity. Moss creeps between bricks. This part of Venice was once industrial. Iron workers, rope makers, carpenters. Now many shops stand empty, their tools long gone, their doorways silent. You drift under a low arch where the water amplifies every drip, every creak, every whisper. The gondolier's, or strokes, seem louder here. He glances toward a boarded window, paint peeling, iron latch rusted. The building looks hollowed out, its purpose lost to time. Another gust of wind stirs the canal. You hear the faint clang of a loose shutter. The sound echoes, repeating like an old memory replayed in the city's mind. Venice didn't decline overnight. Her turning of fortune was slow, like sediment drifting to the bottom of the lagoon. Soft, gradual, unavoidable. You drift past a warehouse where cranes hang motionless. Years ago, they lifted goods from galleys arriving from Alexandria, Acre, and Constantinople. Now, they sway gently in the breeze, as though remembering the rhythm of work long gone. A pair of fishermen sits on the edge of a dock, repairing a net. Their conversation is quiet, their movements steady. A lantern burns between them, small, warm, resilient. Venice still breathes here, still survives, still waits. The gondola turns toward a district where the buildings retain their grandeur, but the water laps higher at their doors. Some staircases are half submerged even at low tide. Time is nibbling at the city's edges like a persistent tide. This rising water isn't new. Some scholars argue Venice has been sinking slowly since the Middle Ages due to natural subsidence and centuries of industrial groundwater extraction. Others believe the lagoon's sediments shift cyclically. Whatever the cause, Venice's relationship with the sea has always been a delicate dance, sometimes graceful, sometimes threatening. You drift onward until the canal opens slightly into a quiet square of water reflecting a pale moon. The buildings here look tired but dignified. Their aging beauty mirrors the Republic itself, still proud, still resilient, but undeniably altered. A church bell rings in the distance, not celebratory, not funereal, just steady. A reminder of continuity, of endurance, of survival. The gondolier guides you gently away from the square. The reflections dissolve behind you. Ahead, the water brightens slightly. Lantern light returns. The canals grow a bit more familiar. Venice did not fall. It adapted, slowly, reluctantly, but with the dignity of a city that knew its story wasn't finished. And soon, as you drift deeper into the heart of that story, you will witness how this stubborn republic kept breathing long after its glory days, carrying traditions older than many nations into the modern age. The gondola glides into a calmer, more dignified stretch of canal, where the buildings rise taller and stand straighter, as though remembering who they once were and who they still may be. The water here reflects not just moonlight, but something deeper: endurance. The kind that grows slowly, quietly, without demanding applause. You've traveled through Venice's rise, its brilliance, its struggles, its shifting fortunes. Now you enter the part of the city that reveals something remarkable. Venice survived. It survived plagues, wars, rivalries, economic shifts, political storms, foreign ambitions, and the slow erosion of time. And it didn't just survive. It outlived empires. The gondolier moves with a steady rhythm now, as though in honor of this part of the story. His strokes are purposeful, strong, respectful. The canal widens slightly, revealing buildings whose facades are weathered but far from broken. Arches still standing firm, balconies still adorned with flowers, windows glowing with amber light. A well-known fact defines this section. By the time many medieval European states had risen and fallen, Venice remained independent, a sovereign republic for over 1,100 years. Few political entities in history lasted so long without collapsing in a civil war, being conquered, or fracturing from within. You feel the weight of that legacy in the silence around you. Not heavy, but reverent. You pass a public well in a small courtyard, its stone edges worn by generations of hands. A woman kneels to fill a jug, her movements slow and practiced. She nods briefly at your gondola, as people have nodded to passing boats for centuries. Across the courtyard, a tavern glows with warm lamplight. Through the window, you glimpse sailors sharing drinks, their laughter muffled but lively. Venice's maritime soul persists. No matter how the world changes, someone is always on the verge of arriving or departing. The gondola slides beneath an old bridge, its stones smoothed by centuries of footsteps. You notice carved initials in the lowest bricks, some faded almost to invisibility. Lovers, apprentices, sailors, each leaving a mark that became part of the city's skin. Here lies a curiosity often overlooked. Venetians preserved their laws, rituals, and civic offices with astonishing consistency, even as empires around them rose and vanished. The Great Council, the Senate, the Doge, these institutions endured through generations, adapting only when absolutely necessary. It was not luck. It was design. Scholars still debate the secret behind such longevity. Some argue Venice thrived because it distributed power across many councils, preventing tyranny. Others claim its stability came from a cautious, conservative political class that avoided rash decisions. Both ideas contain truth. And yet, as you drift through these canals, you sense another explanation. Venice survived because it saw itself not merely as a state, but as a story every citizen participated in, a story no one wanted to end. The gondolier turns onto a wider waterway where small shrines sit at the corners of buildings, tiny altars with candles flickering beside bowls of fresh flowers. Sailors once left offerings here for safe journeys. Families prayed here during storms and plagues. The candles burn even now, tiny flames reflecting across the dark water like scattered stars. You drift past a building whose doorway is marked with a carved lion, winged, fierce, eternal. The Lion of St. Mark was more than a religious symbol. It was Venice itself. The lion's gaze follows you as the gondola passes, as though acknowledging your quiet entry into its history. Ahead, the canal opens suddenly into a broad, shimmering expanse. The gondolier slows, giving you space to absorb the view. The city stretches in every direction, rooftops, towers, windows glowing softly, bridges arching like stone ribbons. From here, you can almost see Venice through time. A cluster of islands joined by planks and boats. A fledgling trade hub, a naval giant, a diplomatic powerhouse. A republic navigating every catastrophe imaginable. A quiet survivor in a modern world it never expected. A gust of wind ripples the water, bending the lantern light into shifting lines. The gondola sways gently. The city seems to breathe with you. Venice isn't immortal, but it is stubborn, resilient, adaptable, alive. Your gondolier steers you into a district lined with arcades, shaded walkways where people stroll despite the late hour. A man reads by lamplight beneath one arch. Two older women sit on a bench, their conversations soft and familiar, their laughter weaving with the sound of the water. A young artist paints by candlelight, capturing the curve of a distant rooftop on his canvas. The city continues, quietly, gracefully, defiantly. As you drift onward, the canal narrows again, funneling you toward a smaller square where a church rises from the water's edge. Its bell tower leans slightly, but proudly. A trio of monks stands at the doorway, their robes catching the lantern glow. They speak softly, hands folded, as though discussing some ancient matter that still has relevance today. This blend of old and new, tradition and adaptation, is the anchor of Venice's survival. The city never erased its history to make room for the future. It carried everything with it, layer on layer, like sediment building an island. You pass a bakery where a man rolls dough for tomorrow's loaves. He hums under his breath, unaware or uncaring, that he participates in a chain of daily labor hundreds of years old. A cat sits outside the doorway, waiting for scraps with patient expectation. You drift away from the square, the canal dimming again as buildings lean together above you. The gondoliers dips softly, sending ripples across reflections that seem impossibly delicate. And here lies Venice's final secret of longevity. It always moved just slowly enough to notice its own steps. Never rushing, never panicking, never breaking apart under its own weight. Soon, you will reach the Venice that existed just before the world discovered it. A city still living for itself, unaware of the crowds that would one day reshape its rhythms. A quiet, unfiltered Venice. The last breath before modernity arrived. Let the thoughts settle. Let the water guide you. Let the ancient republic's endurance sink in. Because what comes next is the Venice before tourists. The Venice that still lingers in the corners of the night. The gondola drifts into a quieter, older part of the city, where the water feels slower, the buildings lean closer together, and the night seems to deepen into something ancient and untouched. Here, Venice feels less like a destination and more like a memory. The version that existed long before crowds, cameras, noise, or schedules. A Venice that breathed at its own pace. The gondolier rose softly, his strokes steady and unhurried. Nothing about this place suggests urgency. The water laps gently at the steps of old houses. Wooden shutters sway slightly in the breeze. A single lantern glows at the corner of an empty campo, its light casting long golden ribbons across the canal. This is Venice before tourism. Not silent, but intimate. You pass beneath a small bridge where ivy spills down like a curtain. Above it, a couple sits on the parapet, speaking in low voices. They don't look up as you pass. They don't need to. Gondolas have moved through this water longer than anyone alive can remember. Their presence is simply part of the night. Around the next bend, a woman leans from her window, shaking crumbs from a cloth into the water. A swarm of small fish gathers instantly, flickering like silver sparks beneath the surface. She hums a lullaby, slow and melodic, the kind mothers have sung in this city for generations. Her voice carries across the canal in warm ripples. A well-known fact emerges here. Before tourism reshaped its economy, Venice ran on a deeply local rhythm. Fishermen at dawn, artisans by day, merchants at dusk, musicians by night, families at windows, children chasing each other across bridges. Life unfolded with a kind of ordinary magic, never rushed, never packaged. You drift through a narrow alleyway of water, where laundry lines stretch between windows, shirts, linens, a red scarf fluttering in the breeze. Someone has hung flowers outside their door, their petals glowing faintly in the lantern light. A cat sits on the doorstep, tail curled around its paws, watching you like a tiny, furry magistrate. Nothing here is arranged for display. Everything simply exists. Farther along, You enter a canal lined with small workshops. Their doors stand open to release the day's heat. Inside one, an elderly man carves miniature wooden boats, each one an echo of the vessels that once filled the lagoon. Inside another, a woman repairs fishing nets, humming softly as she works. These crafts aren't performances, they're everyday life. A curiosity floats into your thoughts. For most of its history, Venice had more boats than pedestrians. The city moved by water, lived by water, dreamed by water. Walking was secondary. The lagoon was the true road system. The gondolier slows as you glide past a small, floating garden, wooden planks supporting pots of herbs, tomatoes, and flowers. Islanders often built these when space was scarce. They drift gently with the tide, tiny islands of green anchored to the doorsteps. Farther ahead, a group of boys plays a game on a footbridge. They toss a small ball made from bound rags, laughing as it bounces off the stone railings. Their laughter echoes warmly, spilling across the canal. They stop only long enough to let your gondola pass, then resume their game instantly. This is the Venice that lived for itself, not for outsiders, not for admirers, not for visitors, but for Venetians. You drift into a slightly wider canal where a fresco adorns the wall of an old building. Its colors are faded, but not forgotten. Angels, waves, lions, stars. Someone lit 2 candles at its base, their flames trembling in the night breeze. The whole scene reflects on the water like a blessing. Scholars still debate when the shift began. Some say tourism first arrived with Renaissance pilgrims. Others claim it began with 18th century aristocrats on the Grand Tour. Still others argue modern tourism didn't truly begin until the age of trains and steamships. All are partially right, but none capture the simple truth. Venice was never built for crowds. It was built for community. The gondola passes a small tavern where 4 older men sit at a wooden table outside, playing cards by lamplight. They argue softly, their gestures animated but affectionate. Their table legs rest directly in the water, as though the canal itself is a participant in their game. They nod at your gondolier as you pass, a brief, wordless greeting between locals who recognize each other across the flow of years. Every building, every bridge, every ripple feels steeped in the quiet rituals of daily life. Around another bend, you find a square where children's toys lie scattered. Wooden dolls, spinning tops, a cloth ball. No parents in sight. Venice was safe enough for children to roam freely, as long as they understood the rules of the water. The gondolier glances at the toys and smiles faintly, as though remembering his own childhood. The canal tightens again, taking you into an area where the houses are closer to the wooden pilings. Some of those pilings are centuries old, thick with moss and barnacles. They look worn but strong, timeless foundations for a timeless city. In the distance, a church bell rings quietly, not marking an hour, not calling anyone, just existing. You drift slower now, the gondolier easing into a rhythm that feels like heartbeat, like breath, like memory. This is Venice stripped of performance. Venice without ornamentation. Venice before the world arrived with expectations. A city living quietly in its own story. As you drift onward, lantern light from a distant window catches the water and follows you like a thread. You turn into one last narrow canal, its walls close and protective. The gondolier's expression softens. Even he seems moved by the quiet of this part of the city. Venice before tourism wasn't just peaceful. It was private. It was introspective. It was whole. And as you leave this stillness behind, you sense that the final chapter awaits. A farewell to the forgotten empire, a descent into rest, a slow surrender into sleep. The gondola drifts into the final canal of the night, a long and gentle stretch where the water feels smoother, quieter, almost velvety beneath the oar. The lantern light around you grows softer, dimmer, more golden, as though the city itself is lowering its voice for this last part of your journey. The buildings lean in closer here, not in warning, but in welcome. Their balconies, their arches, their soft glowing windows seem to fold around you like an embrace. You glide past an old stone staircase, descending directly into the water. Moss grows between the steps. A warm light shines from a doorway above, the silhouette of a woman visible as she extinguishes a candle. She pauses, listening, then closes the door gently, letting night reclaim the sound. This is the Venice few remember. Not the empire, not the marketplace, not the maritime giant, but the quiet creature that lives between echoes. A city that dreams beneath every ripple. The gondolier slows his strokes until the gondola moves almost on its own, following a subtle current toward a wider, starlit basin. The night sky reflects perfectly across the surface, so flawlessly that you momentarily lose track of where water ends and heaven begins. A well-known fact floats tenderly into your thoughts. Venice was built on more than 100 islands connected by bridges, each resting on wooden piles driven deep into the mud. Many of those piles, centuries old, still hold the city aloft today. Wood that should have rotted remains strong, preserved by the mineral-rich waters of the lagoon. The city stands because the water protects what the air would destroy. As you drift, you feel the truth of that. Venice survives not despite the water, but because of it. A cat watches from a windowsill as you pass. Its tail flicks once. Its eyes glow faintly. To your surprise, it doesn't move even a whisker when the oar dips into the canal. It simply observes, as though cats have been the quiet sentinels of this city since the first stones were set. Farther ahead, the gondola enters a canal lined with old warehouses now converted into quiet homes. One window glows with a soft amber candle. Inside, an elderly man writes at a small desk, pausing sometimes to lift his head and listen. His quill moves slowly, deliberately. You sense he's not writing a letter or a ledger. He's writing memory. A curiosity emerges as the gondola passes. Before tourism, before steamships, before postcards, Venice was already a place people wrote about endlessly. Its beauty, its strangeness, its fragility. Some wrote reverently, some skeptically, some romantically, but nearly everyone agreed that Venice felt alive in ways other cities did not. You drift through a final archway, the water widening before you like a quiet lagoon within the lagoon. The reflections grow faint, as though disappearing into some deeper layer of night. The gondolier rests his oar. The boat coasts freely now. Scholars still debate how Venice should be defined. Was it an empire? A republic? A miracle of engineering? A work of art? Some say it is all of these. Others say it is something else entirely. A story that became a city. And drifting here, you feel the truth whispering around you. Venice is a dream. A long dream, woven slowly from water, wood, stone, ritual, danger, and devotion. The gondola glides past a floating garden where herbs release a faint perfume into the night air. Rosemary, basil, mint. Their scent mingles with the smell of wet wood and distant seawater. A single lantern glows beside the planter, its reflection rippling like a heartbeat. You drift deeper into that gentle light. A distant bell tolls once. Soft, rounded, unhurried. Not an alarm, not a summons. Just a reminder that time continues, even on nights when everything feels suspended. The gondolier guides the boat to the edge of a wide stone platform. He touches the oar softly to steady the gondola. The water settles around you, forming a mirror. Here, the city's story feels complete. Its rise, its brilliance, its struggles, its endurance, its quiet life in the shadows, its blossoming before the world arrived, its drift into modern memory. Venice is both forgotten and unforgettable, fragile and eternal, fading and luminous. A place built to be lived in long before it was ever visited. You close your eyes. The water rocks the gondola gently. A cradle motion, slow and rhythmic. Like breathing, like sleeping, like the pulse of the lagoon itself. Let the city carry you. Let the reflections blur. Let the lanterns soften. Let the stories dissolve into quiet warmth. You've drifted through a forgotten empire, and now the night folds around you like a blanket. The gondoliers arrests. The water hushes. The air cools. Nothing more is required. You're safe. You're warm. You're held by a city that has survived 1,000 storms. Let your thoughts slow. Let your breath deepen. Let your body sink into the stillness. Venice remains beneath you, endlessly gentle, endlessly patient. Let the dream continue, even after the story ends. Sweet dreams.